Call Butte-Silver Bowl Council Commissioners Special Finance and Budget Committee meeting for Tuesday, July 6, 2021. Could we please have a roll call?
Cindy, did you check in? Cindy? 8 present and 4 absent.
I am here.
8 present, 4 absent. Please note that Commissioner Mankins, Commissioner O'Neill, Commissioner Anderson, and who else were we missing? And Commissioner Fortune are not present tonight. Could we have the prayer and the pledge? Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Fellow Commissioners, Almighty God, we implore you, look upon us and guide us this night as we make decisions which will greatly affect our community of Butte-Silver Bowl. Direct our thoughts, words, and deeds so that we please you and best serve our fellow citizens.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll call for the special meeting. J.P. Gallagher, Chief Executive, is calling for a special meeting for Tuesday, July 6, 2021 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers to discuss the fiscal year 2022 budget priorities and initiatives. Communication number 1, 2021-318, J.P. Gallagher, Chief Executive, to discuss fiscal year 2022 budget priorities and initiatives. Commissioner Shaw. Do we need to put it? Oh, I passed up the public comment, my fault. Any public comment? If there's any public comment tonight, please come forward on any items on the agenda. I passed over it. I think we can introduce and then we have discussion. Okay. Okay. Seeing that we have no public comment, going on to the communication number 2021-318. Commissioner Shaw.
Did you want to call for comments? Is that how you want to do that, didn't it? Okay.
Okay. I'll call for any comments on. So, Commissioners have any comments? I guess I'll introduce the budget. As we're introducing the budget, this is my first year to do this, so forgive me as we go through this process. I've met with Director Gleason, Finance and Budget Director Gleason, a number of times with each department director head, and as we've gone through every single department and listed the priorities and gone through what the different department priorities were. There were a lot of things on budget priorities this year, a lot of asks, and we were able to go through without really hopefully seeing a tax increase to the budget. We've been able to accommodate a lot of the priorities that were put forth by the directors, and moving forward with some additional support. One of the first ones was District Judge Kirk Kruger and Judge Whalen came to us and requested that we added a county attorney to help out, or I should say a deputy county attorney to the budget. They were asking for 2, just because of the increased caseload that they were seeing up there. It was one of the big asks over the last few years to add that person to it. I worked with County Attorney Joyce to see how we could facilitate that. We believe that one additional county attorney was necessitated at this time due to the caseload that has been there. We're looking at how we could accommodate that as well. So that is one of the additions to it. Another addition will be in personnel when we're looking at the police department. One of our actual policemen were taken off the street to be a bailiff in the courts. It used to be paid for by the court system. It's no longer accommodated that way. So we had to take a policeman from the streets and put him in the court system. So there will be an additional policeman added to this because we needed to accommodate the loss of that person from the streets. So those were a couple of the asks that came about for additional positions that have been brought forth in the budget. Many of the asks for emergency services that you're going to see in the budget this year, we were able to work within the COVID dollars because they did fall within the needs of the COVID dollars, and we were able to make purchases on some of the capital requests through the COVID dollars, such as the fire rescue trucks that were asked for, and some different things that have been there. Also, we need to deal with, let me go through as I'm looking here, the phase 2 and phase 3 communication upgrades that is needed within emergency fire, police, emergency services. Our system was outdated, those costs are coming at us. This is an opportune time with the COVID dollars that we had to make those upgrades at that time. And many of the equipment that was asked for by law enforcement, also fire, rescue, we were able to use a lot of the COVID dollars to make those requests happen this year. Other things that really jump out at us, I don't know of a bunch. Danette, is there anything you would like to add? I'm sorry, Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioners, for the record, I'm Danette Gleason, the Finance and Budget Director. I don't plan on going in detail in all the information that's provided to you. It's more of backup and documentation so that you can look through it as commissioners and then give us a call, either myself or Chief Executive Gallagher, if you need additional information. The fiscal year 22 preliminary budget appropriation is $135.7 million compared to $140.5 million in fiscal year 21, for a decrease of about $4.8 million, 3.4%. The most significant decrease that we're seeing right now is within our capital projects account for the county shops, the Stardom Park Clubhouse, and golf course improvements, as well as the 36-inch big hole transmission line being completed. So basically the decrease is a change in our capital expenditures and projects being completed from last year to this year. In the entire budget, the salaries, wages, and employer-provided benefits increased by $2.4 million. These increases have been discussed, as Chief Executive Gallagher had mentioned a few of those increases, as well as there's attached to your files a spreadsheet summarizing the variable or the different aspects of what makes up salaries and benefits. That's the blue handout, gives you the change in each one of those categories. And then, sorry for people that are behind me. And then also, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the changes in increases in positions from last year to this year. Operating and maintenance contract services decreased by $1.3 million. A significant decrease in that area was a result of our health insurance, self-funded health insurance claims being reduced or projected to be reduced by $1.8 million because of the transition of our law enforcement, operating engineers, and clerical union moving off of the health self-funded health insurance program to their own funded programs. That caused a significant decrease in that area. Debt service has increased by $872,000. For the new commissioners, when we issue debt, we issue it in staggering amounts over most of the time 20 years. And so debt, we try to keep the debt as flat as we can on the debt service schedules, but it just depends upon the market. So you'll see debt service fluctuate over time to time. Even if debt is paid off, you'll see things going up and down. In economic development, grants and donations increased by $1.9 million. And then capital outlay decreased by $8.3 million, as I discussed. In the tax-supported funds, the preliminary budget is roughly $50 million compared to $48 million in fiscal year 21. pretty much relates to an increase in the salaries and benefits of about $1 million. And then another big element was an increase in capital outlay for $1 million. Now, not only some of these increases that are mentioned too, like operating expenditures by $650,000, this does not mean that all the funds that will support these expenditures, the revenue supporting these expenditures, is taxes. And we'll go through all that throughout this whole budget process on how we balance the resource and requirement schedule and the various components of revenue that we receive each year that help offset any taxes that we have. Highlights or the summary of priorities, of course, is going to be COVID-19 response and recovery. How do we continue to respond to what we're seeing, and if new information comes down, and new outbreaks come to our community, how can we respond and respond quickly? And then the recovery process. So in the budget that you have before you, there's $500,000 that has been allocated for community safety within the CARES Act funds. And we have requested additional $1 million as a placeholder in the ARPA committee funds. You do not have the ARPA committee funds before you tonight. We are still in that committee, still making recommendations and going through the process with the committee members. But we also have a placeholder of $1 million to respond to COVID within the ARPA funding as well. Let's see, moving on, other priorities of the government or within this budget, of course, is reclamation. So as we move through the design phases with ARCO, we're also working hard, or the Reclamation Department's working hard on the siting of the repository with significant amount of public engagement and input as we go through that process. The big expansion within the budget dollars is the expansion of the RMAP program for an additional $1.4 million in work to be completed in that program. JP spoke a little bit about the security and safety. So under that, we've budgeted $1.32 million of CARES Act funding to be used for phase 2 and 3 of the large public safety communication system project that we started with the implementation of the new radios for law enforcement, fire department, and 911. And then we've also have security equipment and controls for government buildings funded at about $200,000. In the infrastructure and improvements, our top priority is the Basin Creek Dam #1, the parapet wall. That project's around $4.5 million. In the budget, it will look a little strange. Right now, we're only showing $1 million budget because we have $625,000 coming in from grants. 500 of that, 500,000 is a TSIP grant, and 125 is an RRGL grant, and the remaining is match money that Butte-Silver has to contribute. We're working on funding sources and opportunities. We're really focusing on a treasury ruling that should come out in late August or early September to see if we would be able to use some of the ARPA funding to assist with this project, because it has been deemed one of the major projects of the government. In the TIFID, we have the large rail spur project. So in the FY22 budget, there's $5 million there. And then also in the TIFID is the Sugarloaf Loop Road project of $1.57 million. Another big area that I think we're now being able to see what we've done in the road department. So we have over $4 million in road work budgeted, with $1.13 million coming from BARSA funds. I remember the day when we would used to squeak by to try to get $600,000 or $800,000, and many of your commissioners were part of that. But this is just showing the result of what we're having, the success we're having by combining in and creating that maintenance district. So we're no longer using those funds, the road department funds, on maintenance, and now we're able to turn it around and turn it over into capital projects. And the reason why there's so much funding is now we're seeing the money build up. We told you in the past that we had to let the funds build up and then expend them, and that's the process we're going through right now. We've also have in the budget the Rocker Water and Sewer project of $1.62 million. We're hoping to have $810,000 in ARPA funding. $300,000 will be coming from the Rocker Water and Sewer district themselves, and $510,000 will possibly come from Butte-Silver ARPA funding if we don't decide to apply for additional funding under a different part of the ARPA funding and not use the local government's ARPA money. The water, sewer, and storm line renewals, there's about $3 million in this annual budget. of which 860 is funded from TSEP grants. And then we're also working on the completion of the $3 million 36-inch transmission line at the Big Hole, of which Butte-Silver only spent about $186,000 for additional piping. In Parks and Rec, there's $1.2 million remaining in the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation for phase 4 through 7 for the golf course improvements that are being worked on now. There's $2.5 million in greenway projects slated in this budget. In the building, we have $550,000 in fire suppression at the Mother Lode. $450,000 of this funding comes from the 21 legislative session in House Bill 632 with we have to have at least a 20% match on that project. URA is contributing at this point $88,000, and then Butte-Silver has a $12,000 carryover from a roof project, additional funding that was there that will also be used as match on this project. And then another element in the buildings, we have $600,000 slated for heated storage and shower facility for Metro Sewer. Metro has worked, or the Public Works Director, Neary, and the Metro management has put this in the budget for probably the last 4 years. We feel that this is the opportune time to do these type of projects. We will be seeking ARPA funding. We'll go through that another time. I'll do a presentation on the different buckets of ARPA funding. But the goal or the intent here of putting that in this year's budget is that we will be able to use ARPA funding to supply or fund the Metro line replacements that I had talked about previously, and that will free up money within the fund so that there's funds available to do these type of projects that we probably never would have been able to fund before without these ARPA dollars coming in. And again, ARPA funds are, especially the direct ARPA funding that we're seeing today, is heavily weighted on sewer, water projects, and stormwater projects. In the mental health side of things, Butte-Silver has been committed in all efforts of working with the community partners, law enforcement, the county attorney's office, the finance and budget department, the health department. Everybody's been, community development department have all been working on this issue for in our community. Butte-Silver staff, mainly I have to just applaud Shelley Cleverly and Lucy Hansen. They've been the driving success for Butte-Silver in getting this funding. For many years, I remember receiving $34,000 to $72,500. It just depended if we got $1 per capita or $2 per capita on funding. They've been able to really dig into these funding. Last fiscal year in 21, we received $335,960 in funding, and in FY22, which grants you will see tomorrow night at the council go before you, there's $358,816. Also within the FY22 budget, I've gotten a little smart on how to use the money a little better, and we are funding $20,000 of the Connect position within the health department, and we've allocated $11,000 for administration on these grants. There's a lot of time and energy put in by both Shelley as well as Lucy Hansen in my department to focus on making sure all the reporting is correct, the progress reports are correct, the quarterly reports are correct. So we felt it's now time that we need to start really looking at these grants and start taking the administration piece off there and start really working on that. And so this will be our first attempt at that for this particular grant. Staffing is traditionally about 34-35% of the total budget. More heavily in the tax supported funds, we see it from 55 to 60% in the tax supported funds. This budget includes, for the most part, depending upon union contracts when they were settled, but for the most part, we're looking at a 1.5 to 2% increase on salary, and then on benefits, again, depending upon how the union contracts were negotiated, but for non-union people, a $30 per month increase per employee for the health insurance contributions. So like we'd mentioned, the total increase in all funds is about $2.4 million. Again, I'm not going to go through everything. The salary breakdown is on your spreadsheet. It goes through the benefits. It goes to the different areas and benefit increases, as well as all the different components of the benefits increase. You can give me a call if you need more details on those. The self-funded health insurance plan had significant changes in FY21. that have impacted, like I'd said, just even the overall claims costs that we see in the budget. But as well as on that side is also the premium contributions coming in. So we're kind of in a year of making sure that funds are available, reserve funds are in place, and that we carefully monitor all the changes in the self-funded plan. There's approximately 46 employees that could participate in the self-funded plan that do not. And a couple fiscal years ago, we started a process where if there was individuals that could take health insurance but did not, we were contributing to the fund, because at any point in time under IRS regulations, if there's a change in life status, they can come onto your plan. So there's always some risk of somebody coming onto the plan that has not had any contributions to the reserve funds that help offset the premium costs. So we are contributing half of the single premium for those individuals, and it's about $250,000 to this fund. And then we'll monitor it as it goes along every year and make a recommendation if we continue to make that contribution. Then we've also made some changes. I think I've had a few calls from commissioners today asking about, is certain budgets or certain departments getting significant salary increases? And that's not the case. I'll pick out a couple departments. For example, in the community enrichment department, in the weed department, you'll see an increase in community enrichment and a big decrease in their weeds budgets. And the main reason for that is just trying to allocate individuals where they're actually working. That is a net change in their any cost to the local government, even in the tax-supported funds, because they were being budgeted out of the tax portion of the weed department. So we're just actually trying to capture the true costs of each one of the departments. I think another one that was pointed out to me was in parks. There's not an additional staff member in parks, and there's not any additional increases in the parks budget. It is just simply allocation of staff to the right departments. We'll talk a little bit more about the staffing really quickly. I'll go through some of the new positions, because that seems to always be one of the focuses. So if you switch to the second page in your packet, it has the new positions that were added. Some of these positions were added through FY21, so you see the change into FY22, so they're not necessarily FY22 additions, but they are changes from FY21 to FY22. So there was an animal control third officer position added. That was part of union negotiations. I think JP, Chief Executive Gallagher, can talk more about how that negotiations, when it played out, but it's my understanding the position, and I can tell by the cost, the starting and entry level of that position was decreased, and then in conjunction with decreasing that and hoping to reduce overtime costs, a third position was added to the budget. Chief Executive Gallagher had already mentioned that we've added a police officer. This is an entry-level position, police officer at $76,000 for a total cost. That is in exchange. We now have a court security officer, and that took one of the law enforcement officers off the street. Chief Executive Gallagher also spoke to you about a county attorney that has been added to the budget for a total cost of $111,000. The salary is $81,200 approximately, and then benefits run about $30,000 on that position for entry. There's a clerk 3 position in the health department for a total cost of $61,841. That position was eliminated about 4 or 5 years ago. And this is the only department that has not regained those positions when we eliminated vacated positions. So that position is now in the budget. We've also talked before, so this is, and discussed the planning technician, so it's not an increase in the FY21 to 22 budget per se. It's a change in a position classification. So at one point we had a clerk down there, and that position has been changed to planning technician, but there was no additional costs added to the budget. There's also a request for a building inspector. That is in the budget. That position is funded through the reserve funds within the building and code department. They have significant reserve funds, and eventually if we don't start using those reserve funds, like they're intended to be used for staffing, for speeding up or making the process quicker, we will eventually be asked by the state of Montana to revert those funds. So why that recommendation is important. The seasonal Teamster was added in the budget, but we've added some additional costs for that seasonal Teamster in the road department that works out in the TIFID. And the main reason for that additional request was just seeing the increase in the snow removal in the longer term, that position had to work this fiscal year. And then in the Superfund department, which are all reclamation and environmental services. I'm sorry, it's indicated Superfund there, but in the reclamation department, funded through ARCO and encouraged by ARCO, there's been an inspector added, an audit coordinator, and a Superfund RN for the RMAP program. Excuse me. There's also been a clerk, a Superfund clerk that's been added, and she's been hired and is working down in the reclamation department. These positions, again, have been all funded by ARCO funds, and like I'd stated, encouraged to be filled by ARCO funds. I don't know if Eric's here yet. I know Eric's at another meeting, but he can speak more, and I know Chief Executive Gallagher can speak on these positions as well. And then we also have a GIS specialist that's being split between with the change in department down there, it's being split between ARCO and the GIS department. We've kept on within the CARES Act budget a service worker to continue to do some additional sanitation and cleaning within the government buildings. And then within the IT department, we talked last year about this security officer position that is even more intensified lately with all the different things that have been happening in our country and even hitting more local today. So we have made this request and find it a high priority in the budget that we get this position filled. And then in the budget, there's also funding in the ARPA funds to cover any direct costs for employees that we may have to immediately hire and respond quickly to any future COVID issues. So those are the new positions that are changes from FY21 to FY22. Then listed below, and I'm not going to go through them, are positions that were requested but not added to the budget this fiscal year. And then I've had several questions about increases, and again spoke to you that for the most part the increases you're seeing in the personnel section of the budget are relating to the transferring between departments. There's one exception that you'll be passing in the budget and then have to pass in resolution that was brought forward today by Commissioner, and we do have an increase for our sheriff and our undersheriff in the budget. Those are the only individual increases in salary. That's bringing them up to a pay scale similar to what is being paid in our fire department for those similar types of positions. That is the staffing part. Chief Executive Gallagher, I'm not sure if you wanted to add any more before I move on to some of the capital.
Yeah, I'll talk just a little bit about the positions. And when we talk about the salary increase for the sheriff, I think the retirement of George Skolatich as undersheriff brought light to the fact that we have captains in the police department that make more money than our sheriff and undersheriff. The sheriff is drastically underpaid compared to any of the chief of police around the state. It was important to bring him in line with where we are with Director of Fire Services. I think that they were equal in their duties of what they do. To be able to get somebody to come up from the ranks in an undersheriff position, I think it was really important to be able to do that, because it'd be hard to ask somebody to take a decrease in pay to take on more responsibility, and that's kind of where we're at in that situation. I think that the police received in staff a few years ago. They got a pretty good pay increase, and that impacted the way the leadership was lined out in the sheriff's department. And so it was important to bring them in line where we are with other positions. So the rest of the positions that were requested all have, you know, have pretty good valid reasons for them. As far as the raises, we held at 1.5% pretty much with every negotiation that was done this year, unless they had previously had a negotiation done in the prior years that, you know, they had a multiple year agreement where they might add 2% added in their negotiations prior to this. But the non-union and our unions, I held really true to 1.5% going through the COVID times that we had here. If you have any questions about any of the positions and what their, you know, the rationale behind them, I'll answer those after I let Danette go on, as she's able to explain a lot better than I on a lot of this stuff, but a lot of hard work went into this, but she describes it a little better than I do.
So I'll move on to the capital, starting with actually what we call non-capital fixed assets. So these are items that are equipment or projects that are less than $5,000 but more than $500, and we consider items that should be tagged with an asset tag number and then inventoried. And we change out for the new commissioners. We have a rotation program for our computers that we change out these computers every 3 to 5 years. It's all depending upon usage. We look at not just current usage, but also like over the time frame of how much usage, and then we look at licensing. So is the licensing lapsed and whatnot on those particular computers. This year we're looking at replacing close to $18,000 in computers. Generally, this is low. We're usually around $21,000 to $25,000 in replacement. But I think our rotation program has been in place now for 4 or 5 years, and we're starting to see that we're able to, because of the way we're rotating them in and out, we're able to kind of reduce some of the costs associated with that. Definitely not that they've gone down in price, because due to COVID, we've not only had issues in getting computer equipment, we've seen the price really go up. The drug forfeiture fund has a equipment reserve. Again, I just put this on here to discuss more with the newer commissioners that this is an equipment fund that is established when there's drugs involved in a case that are local. Then any of those items that are sold, or if there's cash involved, that funds go, after it's all settled and the case has been settled in the courts, then those funds get deposited into this account, and the funds can be used for law enforcement equipment. I'm not going to go through everything here. We'd be here all night. But in the buildings, we talked about, I guess back up here, in the capital assets for FY22, we're at $30.8 million compared to $39 million in FY21. We talked about the heated storage, we talked about the mother load, but there's a lot of other items, and you'll see where I've indicated that it's carryover projects. So many of these have been items that were in last year's budget or even the prior year's budget, and they're just being carried over as the projects are continuing. One example would be the caretaker's house at Basin Creek Reservoir, and I've listed all the different funding sources for that particular project. In infrastructure and other improvements, again, we talked about the $4 million that is being spent on roads is one of our high dollar ones. We also have about $460,000 for Molten Reservoir improvements. A lot of that funding is coming from the DNRC, the Army Corps of Engineers, with a big portion of that related to the spillway improvements. And machinery and equipment is $5.1 million. We talked about the big items there. I broke it down for you in this summary sheet. There's also what will be really helpful for you, and we won't go through that page by page either, but there's this 3-hole punched capital outlay report that goes by department, and it shows what each one of the items were that were requested and whether they were refunded or not. So that goes department by department and is a good source document to also be looking at. In some other smaller items that we have, you guys should have another sheet, and I'm not seeing it here, but you should have a vehicle replacement. Wait, maybe it's at the bottom here. Should be another small page. It looks like this. So this is an equipment, do you not have yours in your packets? They were in this one. It's on the last page. It's in this one too. And if you don't have it, we can get you a copy of it, but it's on the bottom of everybody's packets. This is a equipment lease program that we started about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It's an internal lease program. We've used the seed money was funding that we received from items that were sold on auction down at the shop or the corral that didn't have any attachment to any grants that had to go to a particular fund. And we seeded those funding, and now we've built the funds up because we charge a small administration fee to each one of the departments, so that we have funds, always have funds available. So this year, if you look at that spreadsheet, you'll see the vehicles that are being funded through that program. So for example, there's a community enrichment weeds truck, a park and recreation dump truck, a flatbed extended cab in the road department, a 3/4 ton flatbed pickup for the water distribution, a 1-ton dump truck for water distribution, and then a 1-ton for the metro construction. And then the metro plant 3/4 ton truck was not approved. So there's $337,000 of capital for vehicles. This is all the vehicles that have been put into the budget, with the exception of the police cars. We mimicked this program similar to what we had seen on the market in for example, like Enterprise, rental car enterprise company has a lease program, and we've tried to tailor our program similar to that. And they don't do anything over more than a 1-ton, and they don't do police vehicles. So we've tried to mimic this program to run similar to those. It's been really successful, and it has allowed the local government to really be able to purchase vehicles and rotate out some of the older vehicles while they still have value, and that we can still auction them off and put new, safer vehicles on the road with our employees. So it seems to be working very well. There's, I think there's, off the top, $525,000 right now in that fund, so it'll more than cover the $337,000 that we have appropriated here. Again, not going through the whole list of funding, but moving on, like Chief Executive Gallagher had mentioned, you'll see a lot of funding for fire equipment, and you'll also see a lot of funding for the law enforcement, not only for vehicles. There's 3 vehicles in this year's budget. 100,000 of it will be coming from the general fund / CARES Act funding for 2 units, and 1 unit paid out of the capital improvement fund. But also in the fire department, you're gonna see 2 rescue units for $140,000. You're gonna see replacement of a boiler for $45,000. You're gonna see $43,000 for converting old rescues to wildland brush trucks, and then carryover of funding. In the transit department, there's some carryover grants as well. We have a 14-passenger bus for $141,000 and a 9-passenger van for $51,000. The one item that's a little bit different is $45,000 for replacing a wrecked paratransit van. $30,000 of that funding will come from, a little over $30,000 will come from the MMIA for funding to replace that vehicle, but it didn't get replaced in time before year end, so we've had to carry it into the 22 budget to make that. Projects under construction we talked about are the ones at the Montana Connection Park. The large ones are the rail spur and the Sugarloaf Loop Road. And then again, the Stodden Park project is some of our major projects still under construction. There's another sheet that I've attached, the longer spreadsheet. This is the one that shows the line item increases. We also have a decrease spreadsheet, but I should have handed that out as well, because if we increase or do one-time increase funding in 1 year, then we turn around and remove that the next year. So I'll have that for you tomorrow night, the decrease funding spreadsheet. The big items in the spreadsheet for increases, the one item that is not just a one-time funding source potentially is the comprehensive insurance. You'll see that our insurance for our property and liability increased by $150,000. On the other hand, our workers' comp did decrease, and you'll see that on the salary sheet to a tune of about $200,000. So kind of a wash there, which was good news, because I have not seen that decrease in many, many years. on the workers' comp side. Also, line item increases is the Parks Master Plan for $75,000, potentially funded by, so we talked a lot about leveraging funding and leveraging dollars. And so what we've been able to do by moving, for example, the $100,000 that's most often funded within law enforcement for vehicles out of the general fund to CARES Act funding, that allowed and opened a door for us to fund other one-time expenditures such as the $75,000 Parks Master Plan budget without causing any tax increase or user fee increase in the other departments. There's also $175,000 in the budget for a comprehensive update on the zoning ordinances. Again, we just went through the whole process and spent over $100,000 on the zoning master plan update, which Lori and her team and Dylan will be rolling out. I believe it's tomorrow. There's meetings, at least on my calendar tomorrow. Is that correct? Did it get changed? But there's some planning input meeting or some to roll out or some open house. Oh, sorry, had the wrong one. I just caught it when I was leaving my office. Sorry. Had the wrong one. I thought they were doing another open house on it. Anyways, there's the zoning ordinances. They're actually no good for all the money we spent on them if we don't go through and do an update to the zoning ordinances themselves. And so, again, using the funding and being able to push some of the other items in law enforcement and fire services more over to CARES Act dollars, then we've opened up the door and allowed for these type of one-time expenditures to be made. On the revenue side, gross proceeds is anticipated to remain about the same as last fiscal year. I think the question begs is how does that happen? And for the newer commissioners, gross proceeds, because you're seeing copper prices go way up, right? Well, gross proceeds lag about 18 months for the local government before we even see half of the increase. And so that's why we're not seeing an increase this fiscal year in any of the gross proceeds. It's also based on how much ore they get out of the ground and what their costs are too. You know, if utility costs go up or fuel costs go up, that impacts their overall proceeds from the extraction of the metals. On the tax revenue side, we're currently projecting about a 5.5% increase in values. Again, I'm just stressing these are very, very preliminary numbers. You're going to hear lots of different discussions start to roll out now since the assessed values have been out. We have not seen anything on centrally assessed, which is a huge driver of our property taxes here, the local government, and some of our major tax players in our community. And we have not seen anything on that yet. Just other projects that are not currently in the FY22 budget that we hope to work on as we go through this budget process, we'll be doing the ARPA funding and those projects and those recommendations maybe for this year and different recommendations for next year, or a big picture, which is part of it in this year. I'm not sure how the committee would like to play that out yet, but you're going to see us coming forward with those additional things, as well as for many years there's been a lot of conversation about parking lots and stormwater projects at the Civic Center, Health Department, and Courthouse, and those are not in the budget. And then there's been some other talks about some other courthouse improvements that are not yet in the budget that's been presented. I think those are the highlights, the high-level discussion items. We'll have a lot more time for conversation. Just so everybody knows processes, moving forward tomorrow night, the budget is in the Finance and Budget Committee for discussion. The committee will be able to keep the budget there for another week if they so choose, till July 14th, or they can make a recommendation to move it out on the tomorrow night so then the whole council can start talking about the budget. And then I always put communications on the budget, so from now until adoption on approximately August 11th, there'll be many conversations had on the budget, and you'll see many changes coming back to you through amendment process, mainly because we have a lot of grant funding and a lot of grant projects that the bills are just coming in for year end, And then we have to adjust the budget so there's no department overspending any funds. Oh, I think that's it.
Thank you, Director Gleason. The work that went into this is, it's eye-opening as we look at going forward and the requests that have happened and all the different funding sources that we have to account for and what comes about through the budget process. I can assure you that we've looked very diligently at every possible way to fund the budget, what is most appropriate for the use of those funds. And so, as we have gone forward, kind of like when we talked about the Parks Master Plan, the ordinance requires for us to even dispose of any parks property, we have to have an updated master plan, and there's a lot of things that are asked about with different things happening within our Parks Department itself that we needed to do that. Same thing with our ordinances for the Planning Department and things too. So those are funding that is necessitated by our own rules that we need to do. With that, I'll open up for any questions. I know that this is kind of the very first look at the budget, and so I ask the commissioners to go and take a look at this, look at it, and ask questions as they come up if they don't have them tonight. Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. I just got a question about the CARES Act funding. How much of the CARES Act funding was actually used in this, in this proposed budget? And you're right, it is a ton of work. I appreciate you doing all the work, and your staff.
Yeah, I'd be lost without all of them, that's
Yes.
for sure. So there's also in the CARES Act is the $500,000 that I didn't mention that we've already committed for the campaign, the marketing campaign. So that's in the budget. The $1.32 million for the phase 2 and 3 of the communication project. Again, the placeholder that we have in for any COVID response that we have in there, we talked about. So in this budget, without going down through every single thing here, there is about $3.8 million of the CARES Act money that's been appropriated in this budget, and that leaves us about $2.5 million in CARES Act.
So if I understand, just what there's going to be, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
Mr. Chief Executive.
Commissioner Sorge.
So you're saying there's approximately $3.8 million in this budget, and that'll leave how much left, Danette?
Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Sorch, roughly $2.3 to $2.5 million will be in the budget, more so for reserve funding, so we have response. We've also put money in the budget for response, so we don't have to come before you under an emergency meeting or anything like that, so that there's funding there. But there's another $2.5 million that we've reserved or recommended that we reserve till we know what our future looks like in a year or two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. I'm happy to see the first page of the budget being down about $4.5 million, but I'm a little disappointed that I spoke to Chief Executive Gallagher, and I also spoke to Director Gleason about renovating the restrooms in this courthouse. They're a disaster. And I see I know it comes from different fund, but we're spending $600,000 for heated storage and showers for Metro, $550,000 for the mother lode just in the fire suppression, $171,000 at the caretaker's office, just grants. But I drove out there the other day, and I got some pictures I'd like you guys to see that we fought about here for 2 or 3 years ago, and HPC and all told us all this work they're going to do and how they're doing. Well, I got pictures on my phone. I was out there this week, and nothing's been done. It's a disaster. They should take the money, do something with that place, and fix the park, because the park's all burnt up, and there's a person out there in a camp trailer, but that's beside the point. I would like to see some money go into the budget to renovate these restrooms. I'm a private businessman, and if the health department came to my business and the bathrooms looked like they did here on the 3rd floor or 2nd floor of this courthouse, they'd shut me down. I mean, there's no hot water in some of them. One of the toilet seats looks like it came off the Noah's Ark. I mean, this place is a goddamn disaster, and I've pressed it every year more money for renovating these restrooms. All I gotta say is, what's it gonna take? What are we gonna do to get some restrooms renovated in the most historic, beautiful building in Butte-Silver County, and we can't even get it fixed up to look decent? I know we probably need an $8-10 million bond issue to make it work, but until we can get through that, we've gotta do something with our own property here. I mean, it's an embarrassment for people getting their car license and paying their taxes and have to use the restroom when they go in there. If you haven't been in there, just go look at one when you leave here. They're a disaster. I mean, $300,000 probably fix a few of them up, but I talked to Danette about it, and I've talked to JP about it, and every year in the budget, I talked to, Matt Vincent about it. We're just not getting anywhere, and I don't know what I'm gonna do to get this done, but it's been long enough. So that's enough on that one, but anyhow, there's a lot of things in the budget I approve of, and there's a lot I think we're a little over. I mean, there's some positions we're filling, and, just because it's ARCO's money, I guess we feel that we better spend as fast as we can, so I see positions there I don't really approve of and things like that, but I'll go along with that. The other thing is on this sheet here, when you look at the URA or the urban and stuff, you see thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, and it says at the end here, no explanation given. I'm supposed to sign off on this, I guess. URA money, zoning ordinance, $175,000, new positions here, new positions there. I mean, we're a retirement community. Until we get more taxes coming in, we got to hold the line a little bit better and try to spend our money wisely. And one of the things is renovating this courthouse a little bit, and a couple other things is, I don't know how many more full-time positions we need in this community, but I don't mind filling a few of them. But if you hear from your constituents, they'll let you know what's going on. And all we are is the messenger up here, and I'm the messenger. I mean, I'd be a tax and spend liberal if they let me, but I can't. I'm a social liberal and a financial conservative, and this budget just quite don't fit into my needs until we get some things done that I feel the community wants more than what we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Any other questions from commissioners? Oh, Commissioner Callahan.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. Danette, this isn't necessarily about this year's budget, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you about how we kind of got into new territory when we went with the credit cards for the vehicles on the gas. Could you kind of explain a little bit how that's working? And I see there's a spot in there for more money for fuel. Is that part of that, or what that would be, please? Thank you.
Commissioner Callahan, Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Callahan, that was one item that I should have mentioned as part of our projects. Some of our major projects is we are exploring the possibility of purchasing above-ground storage again, at least for some of our units to be able to go back to the bulk purchasing. We anticipated a significant or more increase, I guess, not as significant as we're seeing, but again, that's due to the market conditions right now, that high gas price and not so much our consumption. We've really monitored the consumption and the use, and we asked department heads to be very diligent in watching as well. We send reports to them every single month, pointing out to them to make sure, every once in a while you have somebody slip up and they use the premium fuel instead of the regular fuel, and that's corrected very quickly. Right now, the increase that we're seeing is definitely market-driven, but we've also knew that we were going to see, we just get such a great deal on our bulk pricing. And so we're really exploring the opportunity of funding above ground. So I think what you're seeing, a couple things. One, you're seeing some increases that were added to the budget in anticipation that maybe it's going to take us a few months to get that above ground storage tank in place. The other is some of the funding requests that we're going to make once we finalize some of the shop projects. There was a commitment that some of that funding that was there at one point in time would be used to offset any increased costs, and rather leave that money there with NRD and fund our increased costs. We think it'd be more valuable to actually take the money and put in an above ground storage tank. And so we will be working through that process.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Any other questions for commissioners? Commissioner Frederickson.
Thanks, Chief Executive Gallagher. I have a question on the I can't remember how we've done this in the past, but positions requested but not added to the budget. So those ones will be going through individually, and maybe Commissioner Shaw or Commissioner Fisher can remind me, but they're not added to the budget right now, so are they their request, or, yeah?
Commissioner Frederickson, I can answer that. Those were ones that were asked of that we have not put into the budget for this year, that we, as we look through the positions that we thought we could add, needed to add, these were ones that were not added to this year's budget.
Okay. Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. I mean, I kind of have to agree with Commissioner Fisher on this. I mean, this will be my third year doing this. And, once this list comes out in the paper, my phone's going to be ringing off the hook. I just know it. And it's just, it's really hard to justify these. So I think we need to do a really good job of explaining on why we need them. Because I know, and people that I never hear from, as soon as this happens, they're going to be calling me, and I just know it. So, and on the positions requested, I mean, I'm on the, out of all of them, the assistant manager for Highland View, I know Mr. Fisher's, work out down there all the time working hard. I mean, if any of these positions, I would think that one should have been considered, but anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this more, so.
Commissioner Frederickson, I'll just address a couple of things. A lot of the positions here, as we said, the animal control officer, that was a negotiated position that was part of the contract prior to coming in, but it was one that we had to buy the contract. Many of these positions are super fund driven by filling that now Department of Reclamation and Environmental Services. It's actually filling that department. And then a couple of things that happen with county attorney. I agree with you. Assistant manager for for the Highland View Golf Course, as we talked about it, that one wasn't done because originally that was thinking that we may have to run the restaurant down there. And so we're filling that position and making sure he's fully staffed, but with temporary positions rather than an assistant manager. So we did talk through with Director Lazary and with the manager, Mark Fisher, down there. So I understand concerns, and I know justifying it, because a lot of it looks like there's a lot of positions added, but many of these positions were added to really fill needed slots, and some slots that were vacated and never filled, and now we're filling them after the fact, when over a year or so. So, thanks. Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Everyone needs to remember it's a preliminary budget, and that the legislative branch, we represent the community, and we have final say. And if people want to come before us, which happens many times, that did not get put in this budget, they have an opportunity to plead their case, to come before us, and to, tell us why they should have something. But just remember, we are the body that approves the budget, and this is a preliminary, and thank you so much, Danette, and your staff for this. Is very, very concise. And I think we all have an opportunity that Danette would talk to us individually. I have several smaller questions, but yeah, this is just the start, so it's not carved in stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw. Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, I just want to add to some information on the positions requested but not added to the budget. It wasn't that these departments, we didn't find ways to try to assist them and help them out. So I'll go quickly through it. Like Chief Executive Gallagher had mentioned, we're trying to work with the Highland View Golf Course and figure that out with staffing right now till we determine how the restaurant's going to play out. The clerk and recorder document specialist, she has a part-time gal that is trained up and working through Spherion, and she's going to continue to work that position through Spherion part-time, doing the work that she needs as a control specialist. We weren't sure how much that position was going to be needed into the future, and we hated to turn around, add a position to a budget, and then find out the position wasn't needed, and then eliminate her position after a year. So that is the reason why that position wasn't filled. Government building service worker, additional staffing was requested, but they're looking at potentially doing some contract work like they used to. I think there was a misunderstanding on who was going to fill in for doing some of the cleaning work at some of the locations. The government buildings weekend engineer, it's just, we have a retirement coming, a big gap to fill in December. And it was just noted that there's a potential that we're going to have some additional weekend call-outs. And so it was just brought to our attention to start evaluating whether we need like a temporary position in the engineer, or do we need to actually just be paying overtime to employees. So we're still looking at that. The extension office clerk position was not filled. For several years way back when, there was a position that was split between departments, but sometimes that's really hard when you split positions. And there was a few hours a day spent in the extension office, but right now at this time, we didn't feel that position could be filled, but there might still be potential that we can have some backfill from time to time during really busy seasons. The archives technician from .75 to 1, she's had additional staffing. You've noted that between the archives and the Clark Chateau, the change in staffing over the years, so we've kind of prioritized what we could do and not do. I don't know if everyone's familiar, and Ellen was fine with this position too, not being fully funded or moved up this year. But the archives and the Clark Chateau, there's a large transfer out of the general fund to a tune of over $500,000 that goes into funding the archives and the Clark Chateau. So she was fine, you know, she understands that not every year can you get every single thing that your wish list, that you put on your wish list. A transit driver, we're using a pool of transit drivers right now. Sometimes it's difficult hiring. We all know that in the workforce today. And so right now, instead of filling a complete position at this time, they're using a pool of part-time people and then some transit pool between the paratransit and the transit department. And then in the IT department, we also looked at the priority of what we really needed. Of course, we can always have a bunch of IT people if you want to give them to me, but we know there's priorities. The IT department is funded through charges through other departments. And so we felt the IT security officer is a major, major priority. And so we went with that position. The IT support specialist for radios was more of an ask coming from the LEPC, the Local Emergency Planning Committee, and then with the concurrence of all the members of that committee, thinking that we really do need some time down the road, especially as this technology keeps advancing, that we really need a specialist here to take full advantage of our radios and all the money that we're spending on the communication project. Community development and URA and the TIFID and the TED had asked for a financial project manager. And that position is not currently in this budget. I think we all are kind of getting taxed in our departments with lots of different things at us. I can speak for the finance and budget department, the number of hours that we've spent in addition to doing our normal work, but doing CARES Act and projects. And so every time another project comes down the road for another department, it's going to hit our department too. And so I think we've all are trying to manage that, and we wouldn't be helping our departments if we weren't asking for help either. So there's been that request that has not yet been fulfilled. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that we were trying to work through a lot of these items. Some of them, for the most part, have been addressed with the departments.
Thanks, Director Gleason. Commissioner Thatcher.
Thank you, Chief Executive Gallagher. Firstly, this is insane. I mean, this is a lot of stuff to look over. But not to beat a dead horse, Danette, you know, like Commissioner Frederickson and Commissioner Fisher are saying, I mean, I'm new to this. I don't really know how any of this quite works just yet. But just going through that list, I saw 22 no explanation givens. Are they not required to do that? Or, I mean, thank you.
Commissioner Thatcher, Director Gleason.
Yep. Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Thatcher, will provide another updated sheet for you. It looks like to me you're not getting the second column on here. So initially there might not have been any explanation, but if there's a yes in the column, then we've sought additional explanation for each one of those items. Most of them are like carryover funding, so I think it was brought out in regards to like the grant increases within like the TIFID and the URA and the RRA and the TED districts. Some of those granting line items, it's more that we balance the budget, and you're going to see that change. You're going to definitely see those numbers change. It depends upon how much money, what their certified values come in at, to know, and then they take away their operating costs, and then at the end of the day, it's what do they have available for granting or loan opportunities. So you'll see those numbers change, and the second column in our notes is not showing up here. So those are kind of like given explanations to us that happen every single year that we know that are out there. So I'm sorry, I apologize for that. I should have went line by line here and added that. We were just trying to save space so that you could actually read this instead of, but, so you have a column that has not been added. So definitely, before Chief Executive Gallagher gave us a yes or made a final decision on any of them, actually even the no's, we thoroughly went through whether we called the department or Chief Executive Gallagher called the department head, or when we were meeting one-on-one with each one of the departments, we had some note of why that was denied, or what, at least what the request was for. We don't add them unless there's documentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director Gleason. Any other questions? Commissioner Sorge.
Oh, there it goes. Danette, could you also just give us a real quick rundown for the new commissioners? You know, for the fact if you want to make any changes to the budget, you have to find the funding source.
Commissioner Sorge, Director Gleason.
Chief Executive Gallagher, Commissioner Sorge. So if you have a particular request as a commissioner that you would like to make, for example, can I pick on you? Commissioner Sorge, at one point in time, I believe it was siding at the racetrack fire hall, something at the racetrack fire hall. So he came and worked with me to find a funding source for $15,000. I'm just throwing it out there. I can't even remember exactly what it was. But you have to find a funding source. So whether it's additional revenue, it's a cut in another line item in a budget, some type of source of revenue, I guess, to help with that expenditure, or a cut in another area to offset that. Similar to that, we should talk about too, that you're seeing on this spreadsheet, that on the second column that's out there, is also that just because the one line item increased does not mean that another line item didn't decrease to offset it. So the overall bottom line of the budget did not increase. So for the most part, the direction given to department heads and elected officials was your bottom line of your budget from last year, and your operating costs could not increase. So that, for the most part, is what has taken place. I can't say that for every single thing without going line by line on this with you. But that is a big component too of this increase spreadsheet that you have before you. But back to Commissioner Sorge, so any additions to the budget, again, to balance, we need to know what your revenue source is or what your funding source is for that additional cost.
Thank you, Director Gleason. Any other questions? Seeing none, now I guess I will go to Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Thanks again, Danette, for all your work. And it's a lot of information, but you make it, a lot simpler for us, and I appreciate that. So at this time, I would move to approve, or actually just to place communication, is this where this would go? 2021-318 on file, or shall I move it to Finance and Budget?
Commissioner Shaw, I think you can place that one on file because we have the other communication in the Finance and Budget Committee.
All right. Place on file.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to place communication number, I just lost what I got, 2021-318 on file. Anything on the question? Could commissioners please vote?
Yep, Michelle has a question.
Commissioner Shea.
Thank you. Nothing really on the question. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank you and the chief executive and your department heads for their diligence and their hard work, because putting these budgets together is very difficult. very time-consuming, and I know that a lot of thoughtful introspection went into it, because we all understand the pressures that our citizens are under. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And could commissioners please vote? And would anyone like to change their vote? And clerk, please record the vote.
8 yea and 0 nay.
8 yea, 0 nay, motion passes. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Oh, Commissioner Sorge.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive. Just a reminder for the Finance and Budget Committee, we are meeting tomorrow evening at 6:30 as posted instead of 7.
Okay, so the meeting will be at 6:30 instead of 7 as posted.
Thank you.
And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.